There's this big like lawn area at my school, and I go over there and people are just chilling. I just sit down and say, hey, can I have a conversation with you about the threat of nuclear war? It's like I got like gunk in my chest and it just weighs me down. And I feel like when I chant, it's like I'm scooping it out. I didn't want to like sell myself short with like half-hearted things and like not genuine like great things for my life. I wanted to be great. I wanted to have a great, profound life.
From SGI USA, I'm Cassidy Bradford, and this is Buddhability, the weekly series where I talk with Buddhists from all walks of life about the power we each have to change our lives and the world around us. Eddie, welcome to Buddhability. Thank you for joining me all the way from California. So yes. I always have my guests just start out by introducing themselves so you can share anything, that's interesting or relevant about you, your name, your age, and of course I know you're a student, so you can share a little bit about that. And then also just like a little bit about your life growing up.
Okay, cool. Well, hi guys. Yeah, like Cassidy said, my name's Eddie, but my full name is actually Edward Laiche IV. It's kind of, people say it sounds like it's like a noble like England name or something. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I have the same name as my dad, and I'm 19 right now, and I go to school at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. It's on the central coast of California. I'm studying civil engineering right now. And I want to build houses for people in the future. This school year was pretty hard though with all my classes, but I just finished it, so I'm really happy about that. I'm originally from Burbank, which is where I'm at now. I'm back at home. It's in like the LA area, the LA County area. And yeah, how I started practicing. Well, my parents both are members of the SGI, this Buddhist organization, and they were practicing before I was born, so I've always been around them, in the practice. And I remember like from what my mom has shared and what like my mom's friends in the practice have shared, that like when I was at like the community Buddhist community centers when they were having like meetings, I was like when I was like a toddler, I would always like run underneath the chairs and like scurry around and like take the microphone and like just like I was really disruptive apparently, but I don't remember anyone ever being like rude to me at all, and everyone really just enjoyed my presence, and everyone was so nice to me. I just feel like that positive environment, just like as I grew up, like I think that just was just I just associated almost like a family like connection with like this like community, and it really like I just felt like it made it a lot more natural for me to like try it out for myself.
Was there like any point that, it went from like, oh, okay, this is like, I go to meetings because my mom took me or whatever, to something that you were like, oh, I really want to try chanting? Like, was there anything in particular that made you try chanting? Yeah,
like, I never really understood what like chanting really was. Like, what chanting is, we chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And we do it to this mandala, this object of focus, and it's like a meditation, but it's also a form of prayer and like determining how you want your life to be. And like growing up, I would like use it for like petty things, like not petty, but just like my mom lost her keys, I'm gonna chant for her to find her keys. And I just felt like there was just so many different like coincidences, like I want to get in the same class as my friend in like elementary school or something. I think middle school was a really hard time for me. I think it's a hard time for everybody, man, because like
totally.
So elementary school, I feel like we're all like kids, but then like in high school, we're all we're like teenagers. High school is also pretty tough, but like middle school is such a transition period. We all started puberty and stuff, and I felt like I was just so insecure. Everyone wanted to be cool, and I was caring about what people thought about me so much, and I think like that just environment just like was kind of like a struggle for me. And then like during 8th grade, I got like people like bullied me a little bit, and it was just like, oh man, this sucks. I would chant. I was like, my mom encouraged me to chant for the situation to get better, and that was like so interesting to me, and like I would just like I just want to like get through the situation. I want these things to get better, and like I was given this book by one of like my Buddhist friends who's a little older than me, and he said just like read a page, just one page like every day, and it will like change your life. And the book is titled Discussions on Youth, And there's this Buddhist philosopher named Daisaku Ikeda who writes like all these different topics towards like people in like middle school and high school. And it was just so like encouraging. And I remember I always went through the sections about like love and like heartbreak, you know.
Oh, me too.
And yeah, and he would write stuff like just like focus on yourself and your own happiness. That's what's most important. And like as you continue to develop yourself, you know, you'll attract the best people for your life. And also just like reading all those things about like difficulties and hopes and stuff, like it really helped me like get through those hard times. Throughout that time, I was trying to chant more, you know, and like 8th grade was pretty rough. Like I experienced like loss of like a loved one for the first time in my life, because my dad's brother overdosed on opioids during that time. Wow. In general, that whole experience was so heartbreaking and still shocking. It was like such a surprise, you know. And so I really chanted, because I also tried out the practice in that regard to like just like pray for him, because Buddhism, you know, views life as like continuing after we pass away and we take on different form, but we still carry on the same sufferings that we experience in this lifetime. And I really wanted him to like just like break free from that, because he was really going through a lot before he passed away, you know. So just like that, and just like really like observing like for the first time, the fact that like I wouldn't be excited to wake up every day, because, you know, before like in elementary school, that was like, oh, life is great, you know. But it's, you know, I mean, everyone goes through that, you know. And it's just like, it was good to try out chanting. I did it with my parents, you know, in the mornings, and it helped me just like have hope for the day and get through the day. I'm not gonna get into every single itty bitty challenge I experienced, but I think like a big recurring theme, if we like span out like from like middle school to like throughout high school, is like I think a big thing I chanted about was like girls. I really wanted a girlfriend. I always wanted a girlfriend, and like just all my friends were like dating and stuff, and like a part of me wanted it, because like who wouldn't want that connection with someone, you know? It's such a lovely thing, and it makes life feel so exciting, you know. But I think like a part of me, like I said earlier, like I was dealing with that insecurity. Just that combined with that, it just made me like seek out a relationship just because everyone else was doing it, and I cared about like appearances. And of course it's too young anyway for someone to consider like, you know, like lifelong partner and like marriage and stuff. So I mean, it's only natural that I felt that way, but like at the time I didn't have that profound desire, you know, and I don't think, obviously I wasn't ready for that either. So I just think it was a succession of me just like going through these like relationships with people, and of course I did my best through them, but they would always like end up just like me feeling so sad afterwards, and it's like heartbreak, you know. And I didn't have the maturity to be like friends with the other person afterwards. And I remember like the turning point was when I was in my junior year, like the summer of my junior year, and I met this really nice girl who was like my really good friend, and she had a wonderful personality, and we really connected, and we hung out throughout the summer. I was scared to tell her that I liked her, and that because I was afraid that if we started dating, going into like my senior year, I would be like scared to think about like what people would think about me being with someone like her. And the reason isn't even like a good reason at all. It was just because she was just a year below me, like a grade below me. And like that alone, it was like I cared. That's how you can really think about how much I cared about what people think about me. And honestly, it was subconscious too. But like once that happened, I kind of like ghosted her. I mean, we still were friends. I felt bad that like we lost connection. And as I continued, you know, my usual just like way of going about just like my connections with people, and when those inevitably, you know, fell through, it was like the winter break, and it was like such a time of reflection for me, because I was like also writing all these college essays and stuff. And I remember I read this book that she gave me for my birthday, and because I never read it when she gave it to me, I really realized how I messed up and how like I threw away something just because I cared what people thought about me. And of course I was chanting throughout this time, always chanting throughout all these relationships, like I want this to work out, this or that. Throughout the whole time, just really like my development, I've been chanting through these things, you know. And so now this time I was really like had a lot of time of like self-reflection. I wanted to write like a letter of apology to her. and to really tell her how I've been reflecting. And I ended up giving that to her, and she really appreciated it, and now we're good friends. You know, and really patched that up, and I'm really happy about that. I think that was a really big starting point for me, because I wanted to, from that moment forward, I didn't want to like sell myself short with like half-hearted things and like not genuine like great things for my life. I wanted to be great. I wanted to have a great, profound life. I just developed that desire. I wanted to be so happy, and I wanted to help the like people be happy. I wanted that, you know, and I was tired of like, you know, this reminds me actually of a quote from the founder of our Buddhism. His name is Nichiren Daishonin. He's this Buddhist reformer from the 1200s in Japan, and he had a lot of writings, and I like to remember, like, keep some of them in my head because they're like banger quotes. One of them, and I've always associated this quote with like my own development, with how I like with like my relationships. This isn't the context in which he said it, but that's how I've like interpreted it. But anyways, so he says, "To discard the shallow and seek the profound is the way of a person of courage." And that was like, and that like really struck me, because like I want to seek the profound, you know, because who knows how long we have. I'm getting kind of like existential, but who knows how long we have to live on this earth, you know. Death is the only certainty in life, and it's like everyone wants to make an impact on the world, and I really desired that. Like, that's like the thing that came out of my life in that moment. And so as soon as I really like awakened to that, and I really started working on myself and working on my own happiness regardless of external validation, you know, when I started that, that's when I met my current girlfriend, and she's just such a wonderful person in my life, a real treasure of the heart. And ever since that, like, that kind of period, I feel like I've just been really relying on, you know, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo as just like a compass for my life. You know, I use it for so many things. If I don't chant, like, I just feel like the things that happen to me in my day that bother me, they just kind of pile up. But like when I chant, like in the morning and then after the day in the evening, it's almost like it's like I literally feel it. Like there's like, I don't know. Have you felt anxiety before? I assume.
Oh,
and do you ever feel like
big
this?
Time.
Like, do you ever feel like this feeling in like your chest? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you ever feel
my
that?
Whole
You know
body
what I mean?
Tightens up, and 100%. Yeah.
I don't know, and it's like I got like gunk in my chest, and I just hit it, just weighs me down. And I feel like when I chant, it's like I'm scooping it out. It's a very
like excavating.
I don't know how to explain it. It's just like I'm scooping out that gunk in my life, and I'm bringing out like, because Buddhism teaches that like we aren't our like intrusive thoughts, you know, our negative thoughts, you know, and all these things. Like, what I love about Buddhism is it's so like fundamentally empowering. Like, we're all like good enough inside, you know, we're all like perfectly endowed with like this greatness within ourselves, but it's just all this like stuff that like, it's almost like, you know, it's like the sun being covered by dark clouds, or like a jewel, like like a jewel in like its ore form. It's just like rock, and you gotta like polish it and stuff, you know. So it's just like uncovering the dirt, you know. And sometimes that's what it feels like. But it's like the hope that the jewel is there, you know, that you have all that greatness there. That's like, that's what Buddhism is for me, is really believing in that. And it's a continuous process for sure.
But I think when I chant, it's like you know, when I go through my day and stuff happens, like, it's like you forget, right, that jewel is there, or like the gunk is piling up. And then as I chant, it's like almost like a reminder, like, oh yeah, wait a second, like, duh, I have this capacity, you know. And I think that's why like chanting is so important, and, you know, challenging ourselves to do it consistently, you know, because if we don't, then the gunk really can pile up, and it gets really, you know, almost drowning. Something I was thinking about listening to that is really encouraging for me is like the fact that, you know, you started chanting when you were in middle school and throughout high school, and going through like very difficult things, like combination of things that, you know, most kids kind of deal with, like bullying, love, but then also dealing with, you know, death of somebody very close to you when you're young. I think like when you get distance from that time in your life, people can be very dismissive about like, oh, young people, like they don't know the reality of life, right? But young people have such deep, expansive lives. So listening to, I was just really reminded of that and encouraged by that, because I think there's also this aspect of like when you speak to this feeling of like, I just want to live the most profound life. I think there's something about like, especially when you're young, that feels so like it's so powerful, you know? So anyway, I'm just like so really like encouraged hearing all of that from you. Yeah, really incredible. And I mean, maybe now we can talk a little bit like you talked about wanting to live this really profound life. And I feel like that is definitely reflected in, your life now in college and kind of the way that you're dedicating a lot of your free time outside of your, just your academics. So, yeah, do you want to share a little bit? I don't know quite how we can start it, but just kind of how you started with the two different, organizations or like student movements that you really have been spearheading.
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you all about it. I'll tell you all about it. I love talking about this. I'd like to just like also go back to that same summer that I was referring to. It was 2023, I'm pretty sure. And that was when like, yeah, I just loved that year was a good year because I feel like I really like that one experience near the end of the year, but also like what I think also what helped me lead up to that was this experience I had in the summer. So I went to this conference where I heard this Nobel laureate give a speech about, and this is going to sound like a bolt out of the blue, but he gave a speech about what would happen if a modern day nuclear bomb were to go off on a major city today. And he gave all of the scientific like evidence and reasoning and just like actual like hypothesized data that would happen. And it was actually an underestimate of what would happen. It was just like untold destruction and like it was just so terrifying. And I'm sharing this because this was like a big like turning point for my life. I feel like I'm not the same as before then as to now. Because one, I didn't even know that was possible. I never really thought about nuclear weapons before. Or just like the fact that like he was sharing about how nuclear wars is a possibility every single second of our day, every day, which is literally the end of the world. And I don't know if anyone would be pretty like calm after they hear that, but I sure wasn't. I also felt just like indignant, like how could this even be a possibility? How could we as human beings just like let this happen? Like how evil do you have to be to even like hold this like over ordinary people's heads, in reference to like world leaders who own these weapons and stuff. Just really thinking about these things. And, that conference was so encouraging for me in general. It was like a peace-oriented conference, and I talked to him. He was also trying to encourage us afterwards that we can do something about it. He didn't give us any specific ideas, but I really wanted to I wanted to prevent this as much as I could. And I feel like that was kind of founded upon my Buddhist beliefs and the fact that like Buddhism shares that like one individual, when they stand up and with like determination, they can like transform, their lives and like their society, And so I really talked to him like, what is it that I can do? What can I do? And he told me all about like this whole like national like an initiative in America where there's like grassroots like campaign to like bring like communities together to lobby their cities to like call on the U.S. to, do these things to make the world safer in terms of nuclear weapons. And the main one is to just like negotiate with other countries to reduce your nuclear weapons, among other ones that would also like increase security. But the main thing is that he shared with me that I can definitely make like a club in my high school to like a nuclear disarmament club and get my friends together and we can make an impact in like our local community to like get everyone together to like call for nuclear weapons to be abolished. And I was like, wow, that's so amazing. That was like a new goal that I had. I wanted to specifically, it was like the city issuing a resolution that calls on the U.S. to stand up for a world free of nuclear weapons, do this and that. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do it. And that's what I did. And so in that same like first semester, I was like, I started this nuclear disarmament club, and a lot of my friends joined it. We got all these signatures. We talked to all these people. We met with like the mayor a couple times. We got that same guy to speak at our school, and we didn't end up getting like a specific like resolution that endorsed a specific campaign, but like almost even more surprising like that. And it was like a kind of like a treat, you know, like just in like the 3 months after the club was founded, the mayor like issued this proclamation of support for the abolition of nuclear weapons on behalf of the whole city. And it was like, it happened way faster than we would have thought. And I'm really glad that did happen. It was a big achievement. And I felt pretty good about that. I mean,
That's
just like
incredible. That gave me chills.
Don't say that.
Well,
But
no, just because like to see like the power of like having this like fierce determination and taking action, you know, like you can, it's, I think many people feel just kind of like hopeless or like, well, there's no point, like why even do anything, right? And of course that's just one piece of this puzzle, but like it's so impactful that just in this like, you know, first half of your senior year you were able to get all of this momentum. So I think like for me that's just like, oh wow, the power that like when we really take initiative that things really do move, you know. So that's
Totally.
yeah, that was my chills.
I really appreciate that, and you have such a great point about how people feel powerless. Like I just think that's a fundamental like obstacle of like just like that all people experience.
Yeah.
And I feel like I hadn't really felt like I was an anxious person. I wouldn't say anxious person, but I hadn't really dealt with anxiety till I started like striving for, you know, doing this advocacy for nuclear disarmament. Cause like I just, oh man, I just like debilitating nervousness to speak in front of a group of people, you know, like I started to really practice public speaking when I was like, you know, doing that club stuff, you know, and like, I mean, all people get nervous, but it was just like, I hate getting nervous, you know, and I hadn't, but before that experience, I hadn't really had any opportunities or just like really had any initiative to even do that. Like, why would I put myself through that? There's no, you know, really just, I feel like even just in my senior year of high school, like as I started to make more efforts, I just started to get a lot more anxiety because just of how much I was like getting out of my comfort zone, you know?
Yeah.
But I'm so grateful for it because it's really been such a growth period for my life. You know, like I've had to face so many like things in my life that like tendencies and like fears, you know, and insecurities that I've just had to like battle through. You know, it's just like struggling between, you know, powerlessness and not believing in myself and fear on the other side of like determination and like, you know, a sense of justice and like also fear, you know, but fear, it's like you can either take fear one way or the other, you know, it's like, do you let it stop you? Do you use it to just help you move forward and prevent terrible things from happening? So after that proclamation was passed, I was reached out to by this high school student across the country. He told me all about his idea for starting this national organization called Students for Nuclear Disarmament. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. And me and him basically worked together to start that up. And that was in like my second semester. And then since then, it's just been like, it's so amazing. I've had so many opportunities. Basically, the whole organization is just like a network of like high school and college students who want to make an impact in grassroots advocacy for preventing nuclear war. And it's just like educational, raising awareness, and like, you know, having policy initiatives in like their local cities, kind of like what we try to do at my high school, you know. And it's just like encouraging that, and people making clubs, you know, across the country in their schools. But I really want to mention that like I've been like trying to have conversations with people at my school, just like one-on-one like dialogues with people about the threat of nuclear war. There's this big like lawn area at my school. It's called Dexter Lawn, and I go over there and people are just chilling, you know. And I just sit down and say, hey, can I have a conversation with you about the threat of nuclear war? And it's such a funny reaction every time I share it. I have a lot of like understanding for people's day because I know a lot of people might not want to be bothered and talk about that. But like the people that say sure, you know, I have just such great conversations with them because I want to make clear here that what our organization does advocacy for policy change, you know, like political stuff. I have these conversations with them and I share this is like I have like a petition sheet, and it's just saying like, do you support the cause of nuclear abolition? And it has these things that we think would be good, but it's not like, do you believe that, it's possible for our country to negotiate with these other countries currently? Because honestly, I don't really think so either. It's like, at least with the current state of the world right now. But that's not what I try to get out of the conversation, because what I really try to get out is, how do you individually as a human being what do you want? Do you want, as a person, ordinary person, do you want these nuclear weapons to be abolished? And like, that's what we try to cultivate, is look at all these people all these ordinary people who don't want this to happen, and because our voices should be valued, and they deserve to be heard, and they have so much importance. I said that, but also I also share with them that, like, sure, policy change is cool and all, but the main thing is, in order for those policy changes to even happen, we have to change the way we think. We have to, because these situations are in the world today. That's why we're at this risk of nuclear wars, because we allowed that to happen. It's just what the human condition is. I'm speaking kind of broadly right now, and it might seem kind of idealistic, but I just like to share, like, I really believe that ordinary people like you and me, like, we wouldn't choose to use nuclear weapons on another people of another country, but like, I think, like, as humans, we all have the tendency to disregard other people, and like kind of differentiate ourselves from others. And when we lose sight of the fact that we're all human beings, that basic thing, it's like, my people, your people, or like this country and this or that. I really think like these accumulating factors kind of lead to almost a justification of even having nuclear weapons and even considering to use them on another country. And I think that's the ultimate, I personally believe, evil that we have to just like confront. And this is kind of paraphrasing a quote from Daisaku Ikeda. You guys are probably wondering why I keep mentioning him. Well, personally, I really view him as like my mentor in my life, because I've always had his writings, in my house, like since I was a kid, and they've been so encouraging to me. And he devoted his life towards like peace, and he really supported all of these efforts, for humanistic exchange. He's talked about this as well. It's not the nuclear weapons per se, but the ways of thinking that justify nuclear weapons. The readiness to annihilate others when they're seen as a hindrance to the realization of our objectives. So really, that's like, we have to just like respect the life of other people on this planet, and as soon as we do that, it's just like, we don't do that, and it just keeps going, and we get caught up and removed from reality. It's like, then we can even consider literally initiating genocide on another country. Anyways, I say all that because these are the kind of things that I'm trying to share with people, more than just like making them afraid and just saying like, yes, all nuclear weapons, we're all gonna die if this happens. This is a possibility every day. But I'm adding on that it's important, because it's not talked about enough, that like, we need to really have a more humanistic way of viewing life, and it may seem, and that's why I can encourage, like, I try to encourage each and every individual person in the audience, like, what can each individual person do, because so many times we think it's just like outside of ourselves to initiate any of that change. It's out of our hands. We don't have any of that power. And that may be true for like large scale, like immediate change, but all that kind of change is not going to be long lasting. I'm speaking in terms of like policy changes. Like if we do, abolish all nuclear weapons today, I think it would be great. But if we don't overcome like the deep rooted tendencies to even consider using it, I think it's very likely that we'll kind of be back in the same situation we are today. But I say all that because really, like, that's what I've been trying to share with people. You've probably like noticed, like, the nuclear disarmament stuff is more policy based, and like, but how I'm viewing it is in terms of like, how we think and how we feel and how we like our beliefs and how we act as a result of those, very matters of the heart and mind. And I feel like that is very like in the realm, at least in my opinion, of like what Buddhism describes. Buddhism is all about like our inner realm, and I've been really like, and as I've continued to chant and study the writings of Nichiren, Daishonin, and just like study different Buddhist texts and stuff, and just like continuing to try to understand, these concepts, it's helped me really like solidify the need for these matters of the heart to change as well, you know? And so that kind of ties into like the importance I feel of like how like of world peace, you know, and like of individual happiness, you know, and humanistic ideas to spread in our communities. What needs to follow more than just like you know, policy change, because that's going to happen. But what really needs to follow is just like actual like humanities development, you know, that really needs to change. And how can we even go about doing that? How can we really, but I'm really encouraged to share that all people can go about improving their community. And the really way to do that is, one, the more you develop your own strength as a human being and really work on yourself, you know, and really like bring out your own happiness and just like begin to love yourself, you know, I think that that will reciprocate throughout the people you interact with, you know, and like they can see you as like a role model, you know, and like we all have our own philosophy in life and what we believe is true or untrue. But I think what's most admirable, regardless of what that exact belief is like if you really like strive to live out your convictions and what you believe is right, like with your whole heart, and really try to improve yourself and make the world around you better. And I think that alone is just so inspiring for so many people. And I think as you do that and you continue to like talk with other people, like really like exchange hearts with others, I really believe that like that can influence other people. There's no way that won't, because we're all connected. That's just a fact. We rely on so many things around us, you know. I mean, it is harder to believe that everything around us also relies on us, you know. Yeah. And that's something I'm definitely trying to work on. Same with believing that my actions have an impact on others' lives. But I think that is so important for things like a world free of nuclear weapons, or for like overcoming, you know, racism in our country, or for war to stop in all these different parts of the world. So just like, that's kind of like leading into college, I've really been like aware of that. And I joined the SGI Buddhism club that was actually at my school. And I'm so happy they have one at my school, because there's a lot of different types of Buddhisms, but my specific, you know, organization was at the school. And I love these two initiatives that I've been doing at school, like that you asked me about earlier, which is this SGI Buddhism club and my efforts for nuclear disarmament. Yeah, so to explain, like, a lot of people might be wondering, like, what the heck would a Buddhism club at a college do at their meetings?
Yeah.
And a lot of people have a lot of, you know, perceptions about Buddhism that is very valid, because there's a lot of different types of Buddhism, you know. But to explain, like, at our school, like, we really try to bring like the like encouraging philosophy of Buddhism to people like at school. And how we go about doing that is like on the on-campus meetings, we have like just discussions about life, you know, about our struggles, things we're going through, and it's also about Buddhist concepts. Like a list of like the different topics we've talked about is like first we talked about imposter syndrome. Have you heard of that before?
Yes.
I'm sure you have.
Have I?
I'm sure you have. I'm sure you've talked about that. And imposter syndrome, and then we also talked about like desires, and we also talked about like karma. We also talked about like happiness. We also talked about self-love and overcoming self-doubt. These are all topics that, based on our Buddhist philosophy, Buddhism like describes them and talks about them and has like an interpretation of them. It's just very discussion-based, and everyone shares their input about what do you think this means, and we also share our own experiences with these topics. But like the main thing that I really love about this whole community is like they're all like my dear friends, you know, and just like we all just like support each other, and like every meeting it just gets more and more like involved. Everyone gets more and more open and just like sharing what they're going through, you know. What we want is just for like people to be happy, you know, and believe in themselves. Because I really personally, I feel like my whole like journey with Buddhism and like my faith in my religion is just me having faith in myself, like trust in my inherent ability, and just believing in myself. That's just been such a great joy. And what's really been so like I guess like almost symbiotic with this is like my efforts in doing that like really like reassure me that like I'm doing the most I can to, well, I don't know about most I can, but I'm helping also help prevent nuclear war. I know that may seem kind of removed, but I really don't think so, you know? As I mentioned earlier, it's like the more people have hope and really believe in themselves and really recognize how connected they are with everyone around them, don't you feel like that's empowering? You know? Like, I was thinking about it, like so many people feel like, I feel like an aspect of feeling powerless is like feeling like removed from and separate from society. It sounds kind of abstract, but I really think it's true, because if we think about it, like, if you really believe, or at least like a fraction of belief, that like your life is fundamentally intertwined with those around you, you know, and that like your actions, like they travel and they have an impact on others, you know, if you have like trust in that, even that concept, or even have hope that that's true, like that, I feel like that is such an engine, you know, such a driving force, you know, for your efforts, you know, and I feel like that can really be so empowering and encouraging.
Like, makes it feel like there's reason to like change, you know, there's hope, there's reason, because your efforts impact other people, and it changes the actions that you take too. But I think, like, especially in the US, we're so individualistic, and Buddhism is the opposite, you know, like there's this parable in the Lotus Sutra called Indra's net, which is basically like there's I think all of these like gems in the net, and when one side gets hit, all of the gems sort of sparkle, right? So the idea is like it's a visual representation of this interconnectedness, right? Like, as soon as I'm making some sort of effort, it has this immediate effect on everything. So I think like that, thinking about the connection between Buddhism, nuclear abolition, peace, like they're so connected, right? Living your life based on Buddhist philosophy and framework is living a life of peace, you know, and like creating peace in our immediate environments. So, yeah. You know, one question I was thinking is, both in, you know, like the Buddhist club and also your efforts for nuclear abolition, like what kind of maybe like personal challenges have you had doing this? You know, like, is it difficult to open yourself up to people? Do you experience kind of like setbacks? It's not always going to be super easy and smooth, right? So I guess my question is a little roundabout way of saying, like, how do you challenge that?
Yeah, I mean, the main like word, like few words that were going throughout my head as you were asking me that question is just like courage, you know, and like fear and courage, you know, just like, it's like the hardest thing is like going up to someone and talking to them about it, you know, and the hardest thing is right before, you know, like the discussion meeting where, you know, where I'm going to be sharing my heart with people. It's always worrying about what are they going to say. Honestly, I feel like that makes me even more determined in some ways. Because you have to, when you're faced with that, you have to remember why you're even making these efforts in the first place. You know, it's that resistance when the plane or the bird is like about to do takeoff. They need like the pressure, the down air. What was it called? Down. Yeah. I'm not knowledgeable about airplanes.
I don't know what it is either, but I know what you mean.
But you know, it needs the resistance, and then they can fly. You know, so
yeah.
But that takes effort, you know, and it's just like I feel like with me, it's like when I'm about to talk to people about the threat of nuclear war, or even just like these Buddhist concepts, because these are very like fundamental conversations. What I mean by that is like it's like they're core to what like our existence, you know. Then with that like high magnitude concept, there's going to be a lot of different it's a range of emotions, you know, in these conversations and these things. So I mean, I get the first thing is just before it even starts, it's just the nervousness, you know. But just like when I go about doing it, you know, it gets easier. I get less nervous, but like when you're going through it, life is just, everything takes effort. I mean, that's just a fact. Anything of really like value, you know, if you really are engaging with someone else, like this conversation between you and me, this takes effort. You know, it's not, I mean, I'm having a wonderful time. It's easy, you know, I'm flowing, but what I'm trying to say is like, you know, it's like, to draw the truths that you believe from your heart and exchange it with someone, and then them doing the same, and then you trying to understand each other and like and maybe having different points of view, you know, and trying to figure something out together. Like that's so dynamic, you know, that's challenging, but it's also like, honestly, I feel like one of the definitions of happiness. I really think so. I don't know if that's too abstract, but I really believe like all of these efforts to talk with people, regardless of how the conversation goes, it's just so enriching. All people desire peace. I feel like that's a fact. All people desire peace, you know, but also like people believe in different ways of getting there, you know, and I feel like sometimes we can get too caught up about the ways to achieve peace, and I think it's so easy to see differences amongst people, but it's hard to see the underlying connection we have with and similarities we have with everyone, you know, but they're so apparent, and there's so much more of those than there is with differences, seriously. And those similarities are much more profound and meaningful. And I really believe like, regardless of cultural and language barriers, I think you can find a shared humanity with every living being on this planet, human being on this planet. I think that's a fact, you know?
Yeah.
And just like that, and just like other people have shared, you know, like they don't think that we could, the world would want to abolish nuclear weapons today, unless like another thing really bad like Hiroshima or Nagasaki would happen. That would have to happen again. They said that would have to happen again for like us to really care about it. But I personally really think like we shouldn't have to, that shouldn't be the case, and we shouldn't have to repeat history for us to, you know, stop it, because people have been making tireless efforts since that happened, you know, for these nuclear weapons to be abolished, and we don't have to allow that to repeat it. And also, I guess to answer your earlier question, what also helps me is like realizing that I'm not alone. I'm definitely not alone. It's always harder to talk to people when I'm by myself. That's a fact. Yeah. You know, but like it's easier when I'm with. I have like such wonderful friends who are supporting me or like striving alongside me in this, you know, and that like you know, do this with me, you know, and talk with me, you know, and even like the people I do end up talking to, like the small groups of people I talk to, like I feel like they're all my friends afterwards, you know. You know, it's just like, it's important to keep redetermining and just realize you're not alone. We need each other, you know. That's just a fact. I really do.
When you're having like a particularly difficult conversation, like how do you still center your shared humanity? Like, do you have, like, my personal tendency, because I can be very arrogant, is like, you're wrong, you have no idea, like, like rather than like really trying to understand them. Yeah, how do you handle those when it's like you really disagree with somebody, or maybe they're even being like combative?
Well, I think the way to go about that is through first just appreciation. I think that's always the first step, because really there's always something to appreciate about anything and anyone. You know, Buddhism shares that we're not victims. There's no way, nothing happens to you just unfortunately. I mean, that's probably true. I mean, there's so many unfortunate things that can happen, but I'm also adding that there's good and growth that can come from anything, you know, and you're gonna experience suffering in life, you know, that's true, but would you rather like just let that like cause you suffering the rest of your life, or would you want to at least like improve your mindset a little for you to be able to move forward? You know, I feel like it's what we must do, you know? I mean, conflict and challenges are inevitable. We have to uplift ourselves and really like, and Buddhism shares that there's inherent in all life is just so much beauty and good. It's so hard when we're going through so much struggles and sufferings, and when we're faced with someone who seems so opposed to us, and we're in these hard situations, but there's always something to appreciate. I'm staking my life on that fact. There's always something to appreciate. I wholeheartedly want to believe that, and I've been trying to act with that hope. You know, it takes a lot of effort to even like change your mindset from of just like, you know, I guess anger or suffering, whatever, to like, I appreciate you. That takes some guts right there. That takes a lot, you know? Yeah. I think as soon as you make that step, oh my gosh, it just changes the whole situation. Because the thing is it brings out your sincerity for the other person, at least when it's a person-to-person conflict, you know? And I think I I really think everyone can sense sincerity, but to have sincerity, that's the main thing. To not react emotionally, to react based on the idea that they are also a human being. They're also struggling. They also they're the way they are based on all these factors, this or that. And really, another word for appreciation is like awareness. You got to take a step back and just kind of recognize the person in front of you. And sometimes you don't have to keep talking to them, you know? I mean, you don't have to keep talking with someone, you know? And sometimes the thing is to just not reciprocate what they're doing to you. Like if they insult you, you don't have to insult them back. All actions we do, it has an impact on others, especially if we keep our dignity about us. And like, I think the main thing, at least in an inconspicuous long-term way, is to be a role model, you know, to really develop ourselves and be a role model. You know, I was talking to my friend about this recently. It's important to just like, in our life as we go about, you know, working towards, you know, our goals and our things that we want to change. Therefore, as long as you continue to improve yourself, your character is going to shine through, you know, like truth illuminates the human being. It's just, you're gonna inspire people around you. It's just a natural thing. It's like I mentioned earlier that the sincerity you'll have is going to make an impact on people. You know, I don't agree with this guy, but he was so kind to me. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean,
totally.
No one's ever said that to me before.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like I've felt that way with people before, you know?
Yeah.
And like, it's important to just, as long as you're continuing, and we're all going to have these hard conversations, but as long as you continue to work on yourselves, you know, and not be the way you don't want, not be the way that you disagree with, you know, that you think is, you know, wrong, you know, I just keep improving yourself. It's going to be all right. I really think so. I mean, I'm doing my best to do that.
In some ways, it's like a skill that we keep building. And the more that you experience, like, oh, because I like really was sincere in listening to them and appreciating what I could about them, like when you see the result of that over time, you gain more and more confidence that that outcome is possible. Because I even was like listening to you, I was thinking just last night we had some dispute with a neighbor about our dogs, and the neighbor was like super angry over text, and my wife and I were like getting really worked up, and he was like, I want to talk to you in person, and I was freaked out. I really hate conflict. I hate when people are like mean to me. And, you know, the conversation started a little, exactly. The conversation started a little like, you know, tense at first. And then, you know, as soon as I said, like, you know, I really appreciate you bringing this to our attention, even though it was a little harsh and I don't know if I totally agreed with, you know, the way that you communicated to us or the, you know, whatever, but I really appreciate you sharing, and I completely understand why you would be, you know, concerned. And then the rest of the conversation totally changed. He was like so willing to listen to like everything that we had to say about our dog and all the efforts we're making with training, and, you know, and it ended up being like a really, I might even say lovely conversation. But in that moment, I realized like, wow, just the power of being sincere and like letting go of my ego a little bit, you know, recognizing where I'm wrong, being able to understand this person that, you know, is upset. And so I think the more and more that we have the courage to do that, I mean, like, I did not want to have that conversation with him, but I was like, okay, I have to, I know. But the more and more that we get this practice, it becomes with time easier. I mean, has it gotten any easier for you this year, having these conversations?
I was just going to say, when you said the more we do it, it gets easier, and I said, oh, that's so encouraging. Because, you know, I mean...
Yeah, you need still more practice.
Of course, I definitely need more practice, you know. But I think this is the fundamental aspect of myself, is just, like, fear, you know. Getting afraid of putting myself out there, and I have a really big fear of failure, you know. And a part of me wants to overcome all fear, but also... I guess a way I'm looking at it is like, I never want to lose my care for these conversations. You know, I feel like getting nervous about something helps me appreciate how important it is. Like, even for this conversation, I
Wow.
was so nervous before it, but it made me think, well, if I'm this nervous, it must be such a great thing for my life. And I hope I can encourage people through this dialogue I'm having with Cassidy, you know? Or you can apply that to anything in your life. All people go through things where it's just a lack of desire to do things that take effort, because that's struggle and suffering. I mean, that's just a fact of humanity.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think just for me, it's just I just got to have more hope, have more trust in myself, you know, and have more to just keep renewing my determination. I'm really thinking about it. Like, I also learned, it's not a destination paradigm.
Yeah.
It's more of like a continuous process. Even like when I'm talking to some of my friends about Buddhism, a lot of people think like enlightenment in Buddhism is like a destination that once you achieve it, it's just like you're good forever. But really, like how our practice views like enlightenment is, it's like the Buddha way, you know. It's a continual. If you look at the life of the actual historical Buddha Shakyamuni, his life was continual struggling and effort. He faced so many persecutions and struggles, you know, but his life was directly towards improving himself and the people around him, you know, and continually seeking and understanding the truth. That's what I mean. I'm talking about Buddhism now, but you can apply that to world peace. You know, peace isn't just it's not just a destination. Once you get it, we're all good. These are aspects of life, you know, this disrespect and this apathy and greed. It's always going to be there. It's just a matter of, can each individual person recognize that they can overcome it, and is each person fighting against it? If we're all together, you know, on the same planet, we got to be united, you know. And so just keep working on yourself, you know, keep improving, and that's going to help the world around you. We're all connected, you know. So it's just a continual renewal, like I said earlier. But saying that, it's easy to say that. It's so easy to say that. But it's just like, it's so much, that's like a lot, you know? But I think I find comfort in the fact that I have autonomy and responsibility. That's like kind of encourages me that like, it does come down to me. You know, like it is on my shoulders. If I change, I can actually make a difference, and I'm doing the most I can. And that is making an impact. I think that's just so encouraging. And if the more people that know that, the more people stand up, you know, on their own, in their own unique way. And one more thing I want to just add, like, I think, like, what makes someone great isn't necessarily, like, the actual things they do, like, the actual, like, accomplishments they've had, the actual, like, achievements. It's not the milestones, necessarily, is what I'm trying to say. It's the actual... a person is great if they're actually improving and striving. You know, the act of striving and improving themselves. I believe that's so respect worthy, and that already makes them great. Because they're eventually going to get to there. You know, it's like the thing. You know, it's not the destination. It's the journey. You know, so I'm going to try to have more appreciation for myself in the fact that I'm making these efforts. You know, I can be really hard on myself a lot. That's also something I'm working on. Not giving myself any form of like validation or credit for the efforts I'm making, you know. But it's just like I'm finding like I'm trying to get better at just being more encouraging self-talk to myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have like an inner critic that can just go on for days and days. But it really, I have to say, since like, you know, I started college to now, it's like totally different. So I can guarantee you it will change. But, you know, something that I think about is like when I'm chanting, I'm like praising my life and really like recognizing this Buddha nature. So every time I chant, you know, I'm really recognizing the power of my life. But I think it's so common, especially when we feel like all of the problems in the world are so big, it can feel like we're not doing enough. But to your point, really recognizing that it's like the effort, the continuous striving, that's like the most noble, you know, way to live your life. And of course, we can always challenge ourselves to do more, and we should. But, you know, it's hard to challenge yourself to do more when you're just like stuck criticizing yourself, you know. But I think, you know, this has been like such an incredible conversation. I feel so like, I feel really refreshed. You're just like, yeah, such an encouraging, like wise person.
So are you.
Thank you.
Come on now.
Yeah. You're right. Okay, I praise myself. You're right. But yeah, I think like to kind of wind down the conversation, I think I wanted to have just one final question for you. I'm wondering what advice you would give to somebody kind of based on Buddhism who really wants to see something in the world change, but right now, like, they're sort of stuck in apathy.
You said apathy. That's really interesting. Where did you feel like the phrase apathy came from for you to ask that question? Like, what do you mean by that? Like, could you describe what you mean?
Yeah. I mean, I use that word because I think about it for myself. Like, during 2020, that year, I went through a really kind of deep depression, and I felt just sort of even though I felt like, wow, there are so many things in the world that need to change, I just was like indifferent, sort of like, what's the point? You know, even though I want these things to change, I was just stuck in feeling like it's all big and scary, so why even do anything?
Mm-hmm. Well, I really think, like, first and foremost, when we're suffering, it's important to reach out to other people. There's always at least one person in your life that's willing to listen to you. It may seem like there isn't, but there's always someone. I think just to lay the groundwork, I think that's important to recognize, you know, and talking with people, while it may be hard, it's like sometimes you have to break out of your own shell. You mentioned the Lotus Sutra earlier, and that's what, like, the backbone of, like, SGI's Buddhism. And the Lotus Sutra is called Lotus because it's based on the lotus flower, and it's this beautiful flower that blooms in, like, this gross, like, muddy water, you know? And so it's a reference to how human beings can bring out, like, such greatness and happiness from the depths of their life filled with suffering, or the world around them filled with suffering. And so I say that because any progress you make towards getting out of that muddy pond, you know, that murk, it's wonderful. It's amazing. Like, that's so valuable. Your happiness is not alone from anyone else's happiness, because I don't know if you've heard the phrase, like, no man is an island, you know? Like, I love that phrase, man. And it's just like, it's true. Personally, why I'm so passionate about sharing the ideas of Buddhism with my friends is because it's so, like, it's like just even having the concept in your head, regardless of if you believe it or not, the knowledge, like, there's just the idea, it can really, like, be so encouraging and hopeful in, like, dark moments, you know, because it's like, dang, my friend Eddie said that, Buddhism says that, you know, there's every single thing I'm going through, I can overcome it. I can be happy and help all people around me be happy. You don't have to even believe that. I struggle with believing that, but it's like, you know, it's just like having the hope that there's light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, so many different books and philosophies and religions, you know, share that, but it's just important to have some form of encouragement for yourself, you know? I feel like every time someone has shared that with their whole sincerity back behind it, it's helped me get out of my dark times, you know? You don't even need to worry about, oh, I'm not doing enough for peace, because you're naturally going to be having such a positive influence on your environment. Just meet yourself where you're at, you know? And as long as you, like I said earlier, you're just like, as long as you're striving, that's like, you're already great, you know? And you'll get to where you want to be. You can be a huge advocate for peace in the future, but it's like, that's gonna come with time, you know? And like, I feel like to the extent in which I bring out like a more like expansive state of life is to the degree in which I am even capable of making efforts for something like nuclear disarmament. So just my answer is just like, your happiness and like your efforts for your own peace, your own inner peace, is not removed from the peace outside of yourself. But as long as you don't give up, it's all going to be all right, you know? I try to win each day, you know? It's just, how can I win today?